Bottom line, here's something that you have to understand about user stories. A user story is just a story told from the perspective of a user, right? There's no such thing as a tech story. There's no such thing as a business story. There's just a user story, right? So a user story is some kind of valid and demonstrable narrative that you can construct and show to whoever is going to be using your product. So a technical story might most likely be a technical task. Cleaning up code is going to affect the system largely in a whole bunch of different scenarios. So cleaning up code could be one of the operational tasks or one of the maintenance tasks, or say one of the deployment operational improvement tasks that you will execute for a whole bunch of different narratives. So that task might not be called a story, because if you tell a customer, I'm going to clean up your code and operationalize this with 3 more seconds of efficiency, they don't really understand what that means. Right? But if you can tell them that when you put data into this and you hit search, if you want the data to come back in 2 seconds, but right now it's taking 15 seconds, wouldn't that be a cool thing for you? So as long as you as a product owner can cobble together that narrative and you can explain it to your stakeholders, then it makes sense for them. This is usually the same question you will get even from people who will say, well, this is a technical thing, so it doesn't really have any business impact. Everything has business impact, right? Some things have directly visible business impact. Some things are a little under the hood. So your job as a product person is going to be to explain to the people who don't understand what's happening under the hood, why this one specific technical task is so important for them in the large scheme of things. The user story can be written by anybody in the team as long as it is written from the user's perspective. Now, whether that user story becomes an actionable item in the backlog of ideas that the team needs to work on, that needs to be vetted through the person who's responsible to own that backlog, which is the product owner. And so some teams take it literally and say, well, that's, if the product owner owns the backlog, then they're always writing stuff and nobody else gets to write stuff. You can. Anybody in the world can write a user story as long as they're written from the user's perspective and they're vetted by the product owner before they're called a legitimate item that is part of your scope of work. As long as that is happening, as a business systems analyst, you can write a story. But just because you write that story, it doesn't mean it's in scope for that product backlog. And that vetting still needs to happen through the product owner, because the product owner is the single interface or that gatekeeper between the rest of the world, internal or external, and that Scrum team that is going to be working on that stuff. Yeah, so I'd say a general rule would be that the product owner is responsible for owning the what and the why, because the product owner is the content expert. So they're like a subject matter expert on what are we supposed to do and why are we doing all of this, which means what really is about the actual content or the actual requirement. The why is the business justification. Like you said, the big picture. So the team understands why this is so important to do in the large scheme of things. The product owner owns conveying all of that big picture education to the team, as well as elaborating what that big picture means from a business perspective, right? Then there is the developers who own the designing, solutioning, estimation, which is basically the how and the how much, right? So the product owner owns the what and the why. They write all of that stuff. The developers who own the how and the how much, they color those items from an implementation perspective with the right amount of detail. The Scrum Master is involved in neither of those. The Scrum Master has been hired to make sure this team has whatever they need to get the job done. That could be something as simple as making sure that both these people don't overstep their boundaries. That means the Scrum Master is actively facilitating the negotiation between the product owner who's responsible to write those things from a business perspective and the developers who are supposed to work on those things so that they have the right level of detail. And one of the tools they will use as a Scrum Master for that facilitation are boundary conditions of distilling down information to specific things like a definition of ready. So whatever doesn't meet the definition of ready doesn't get into the sprint. That's it. Blanket rule. Whatever doesn't meet the definition of done doesn't get out of the sprint. Blanket rule. So quality comes in, quality goes out. The Scrum Master sort of enforces that self-discipline in the team to ensure that they stick to those boundary conditions. That's a relatively straightforward part of a Scrum Master's job. Something that's a little more convoluted could be coaching. So when you're coaching the team, you're making sure that you're always following this philosophy of you not assigning the work, which means ask yourself, am I teaching my team how to do their job or am I doing their job for them? That means if they can't agree on who needs to pick up this work item, you have to facilitate the conversation in such a way that they sort of self-discover what the outcome of that conversation is going to be. It's very easy to say, well, you do this and you do that. But what happens when you're not around, right? So this is where a lot of that active questioning and active listening comes in, where you engage them in a debate to say, okay, so what are we trying to do here? What's the end in sight, right? Who is the expert on this stuff? And do we want to continue that person to be the expert, or is it time for somebody to do some cross training so that this person can actually go on vacation? Or if they get, poached by another company, then what do we do? Then we're stuck. So that is the kind of stuff that the Scrum Master is thinking about from that perspective. But they are not writing the stories, or they're not executing or building that code. You already have people for that. It's kind of like having a manager. Your manager does not get in and start to do your work. They will make sure you have the clarity and the competence to get the job done. That's what a coach does, right? The coach doesn't get on the field and run the actual plays. They're thinking about strategizing the plays and looking at the overall field and saying, is everybody in the right place where they need to be? For that to happen, everybody needs to have the clarity and the competence. So the coach is focusing on those things. So they're setting them up for success.